some sounds you hear once and spend the rest of your life trying to forget. I heard mine 15 years ago in the Siberian wilderness, and I still wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced I'm hearing it again. What I'm about to tell you happened during the winter of 2010, deep in the Sakha Republic, and it's the reason I'll never set foot in Siberia again. My name is Trevor, and this is what happened when my research team went looking for a missing expedition. I was a graduate student back then, part of a climatology team studying permafrost degradation near the Verkhoyansk Range. Our base camp was a collection of heated tents about 80 kilometers from the nearest village. We'd been out there for 6 weeks when we got word that another research group, a geological survey team of 4 people, had missed their scheduled radio check-in. They'd been working about 30 kilometers northeast of our position. The authorities were 3 days away by snow vehicle, so our lead researcher, Dr. Helen Kowalski, volunteered our team to investigate. We were the closest humans to their last known location. I remember thinking it was probably nothing. Dead radio equipment, a generator failure. Maybe they decided to extend their survey and forgot to call it in. These things happened. The Siberian wilderness doesn't exactly come with cell towers and Wi-Fi, but there was something in Dr. Kowalski's voice when she briefed us, something tight and worried, that made my stomach turn. She'd been doing Arctic research for 20 years. She knew when something felt wrong. We set out at first light on the 3rd day after their missed check-in. There were 5 of us on 2 snow machines, following GPS coordinates to their camp. The landscape was endless, white broken only by clusters of skeletal larch trees. The temperature was minus 38 Celsius, cold enough that your breath crystallized instantly, and any exposed skin went numb in seconds. The sun hung low on the horizon, giving everything this pale, sickly light that made the snow look gray instead of white. I was riding behind Dr. Kowalski, and I kept watching the tree line, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching us back. We reached their camp just before noon. What we found made no sense. The tents were still standing, perfectly intact, but the entrance flaps were wide open. Snow had drifted inside, covering everything in white powder. Their equipment was still there, including their radio, which we found smashed to pieces on the floor of the main tent. The generator was running. Their personal belongings, cold weather gear, food supplies, all of it was exactly where it should be. But the 4 researchers were gone. Dr. Kowalski tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd gone for a walk. Maybe they'd seen something interesting and wandered off to investigate. But even as she said it, I could see she didn't believe it. Nobody goes for a walk in minus 40-degree weather without their parkas. We found all 4 of their heavy coats hanging in the supply tent. Their boots were lined up neatly outside their sleeping quarters. It was like they'd walked out into the Siberian winter wearing nothing but their base layers and vanished. Then I saw the tracks. They started at the camp's edge and led north into a dense section of forest. Not normal footprints. These were bare feet, 4 sets of them pressed into the snow, heading in a straight line toward the trees. I called the others over, and we all stood there staring at those tracks in horrified silence. The prints were small, narrow, frozen solid. Someone had walked barefoot through snow and minus 40-degree cold. We followed them. Dr. Kowalski argued against it, said we should mark the location and wait for authorities. But one of our team members, a guy named Brett, was already moving forward. The rest of us had no choice but to follow. The tracks led us deep into the forest, weaving between trees that seemed to lean in closer the further we went. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just our breathing and the crunch of our boots in the snow. After about 20 minutes, the tracks stopped. Not gradually. Not like the people had turned around or fallen. They just ended, all 4 sets, in the middle of a small clearing. There was nothing around them. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No disturbance in the snow beyond the footprints themselves. It was as if 4 people had walked to that exact spot and simply ceased to exist. That's when I heard it. A voice, distant and distorted, calling my name. Trevor. It sounded like my sister, Emily, but that was impossible. She was in Boston, thousands of miles away. I spun around, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then Dr. Kowalski gasped. She'd heard something too. Her daughter's voice, she said, calling for help. One by one, we all heard them. Voices of people we loved, people who weren't there, calling to us from the forest. Brett heard his dead father. Another team member, Lisa, heard her boyfriend. The voices were perfect. Exact. They knew details, used phrases only those specific people would use. And they were all calling us deeper into the trees. I remember the overwhelming urge to follow my sister's voice. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and was physically pulling me forward. My legs started moving on their own. I took 3 steps before Dr. Kowalski grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. She was screaming, telling us not to listen, not to move, but her voice sounded so far away compared to the others. The forest voices were crystal clear, intimate, desperate. They begged us to come find them. Brett broke free. He ran toward the trees, calling for his father, and disappeared into the darkness between the trunks. We tried to follow, but the moment he crossed into that deeper section of forest, his voice cut off. We shouted his name. Nothing. Dr. Kowalski fired a flare into the sky, the red light briefly illuminating the canopy. In that moment of brightness, I saw them. Shapes tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. They didn't move, didn't react to the light. They just stood there, watching us with what I can only describe as patient hunger. We ran. I don't remember the decision to run, but suddenly we were all sprinting back toward the snow machines, our lungs burning from the cold air, our hearts hammering. The voices followed us, no longer calling our names, but laughing, high-pitched, childlike laughing that echoed through the trees. We didn't stop until we reached the machines. We didn't look back. The authorities found Brett's body 3 weeks later, 11 kilometers from where we'd last seen him. He was barefoot, frozen solid, positioned upright against a tree with his arms spread wide. His eyes were open. The medical examiner said he'd died from exposure, but there was something she couldn't explain. His internal body temperature suggested he'd been alive for days after we saw him run into the forest, walking through that killing cold without proper gear, and his face had this expression of absolute peace, like he'd been happy. They never found the original 4 researchers. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead from exposure. But I know what happened to them. The same thing that almost happened to us. Something in that forest calls to people. It uses the voices of the ones we love, and when we follow, it takes us. Where? I don't know. I don't want to know. I still hear my sister's voice sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet. Not Emily's real voice. The other one. The one from a forest. It whispers my name, soft and sweet, asking me to come back, telling me there's something I need to see, something waiting for me in Siberia. I've changed my number twice and moved to a different city, but the voice always finds me. Whatever took those researchers, it remembers me, and I think it's still hungry. They found my uncle's expedition journal 3 months after he vanished, frozen in the permafrost near Lake Baikal. The pages were brittle, stained with something dark that the authorities said was mud. But I've read every word he wrote in those final days, and I know it wasn't mud. My name is Claire, and what I'm about to tell you is why I spent 5 years trying to stop the Lake Baikal development project. Some things should stay frozen. It was August 2013. My uncle, Jerome, was a microbiologist specializing in extremophiles, organisms that survive in extreme conditions. He'd secured funding to study microbial life in the Siberian permafrost near Lake Baikal, looking for bacteria that might provide insights into potential life on Mars. It was supposed to be a routine research trip, for weeks of drilling core samples, documenting findings, then home. He took a small team, 2 graduate students named Oliver and Rebecca, and a local guide called Dmitri. I was supposed to go with them. I'd backed out at the last minute to attend my best friend's wedding. The first 2 weeks went perfectly according to his journal. They'd set up camp on the lake's northern shore, an area where recent warming had caused significant permafrost melt. They were finding incredible specimens, ancient bacteria dating back thousands of years, all perfectly preserved in the ice. Jerome's entries were excited, full of scientific enthusiasm. Then, on day 16, everything changed. They found the pit. Jerome described it as a circular depression about 15 meters wide, perfectly symmetrical, that had appeared overnight in the permafrost about half a kilometer from their camp. The ice around it had melted in concentric rings, and there was this smell, he wrote, like ozone and rotting fish. Dmitri refused to go near it, said his grandfather had told stories about places like this, spots where the earth opened up and something old woke up. The grad students thought it was fascinating. They wanted to investigate immediately. Against Dmitri's warnings, they rappelled down into the pit the next morning. It was deeper than they'd thought, nearly 30 meters, and at the bottom they found what Jerome described as a chamber. Not a natural cave, a chamber with walls that seemed almost carved, smooth and angular. And in the center of that chamber was something frozen in the ice. Something large. Jerome's description was vague, almost reluctant, but he mentioned it was vaguely humanoid in shape, with proportions that were wrong, limbs too long, a head too narrow. They couldn't make out details through the ice, but they could see enough to know it wasn't any animal they recognized. They took samples, documented everything, set up equipment to monitor the temperature. Jerome noted that the ice around the figure was melting faster than it should, even accounting for the recent warm spell. It was as if the thing itself was generating heat. That night, back at camp, Oliver started acting strange. He kept saying he could hear singing, beautiful singing, like nothing he'd ever heard before. Rebecca and Jerome couldn't hear anything. Dmitri packed his bags and left on foot, said he was walking back to the village, that they should leave too. They never saw him again. Search parties found no trace of him. The next entry was dated 3 days later. Jerome's handwriting was shaky. Oliver had disappeared during the night. They'd found his tent empty, his sleeping bag torn open from the inside. His tracks led back to the pit. When they went looking for him, they found the ice chamber completely thawed. The water at the bottom was murky, dark, and the figure was gone. There was just an empty depression in the rock where it had been, and Oliver was standing in that water, naked, facing the wall, completely unresponsive. When they tried to pull him out, he started screaming. They managed to get Oliver back to camp, but he wasn't the same. Jerome described him as vacant, moving only when directed, speaking in single words. His eyes were glassy and focused. But the worst part was his temperature. Oliver's body was cold. Not cool. Not chilly. Cold, like he'd been submerged in ice water. But his core temperature was 92 degrees and dropping. They couldn't warm him up. Blankets, heaters, hot liquids, nothing worked. And he kept trying to go back to the pit. Rebecca wanted call for evacuation, but their radio had stopped working. The satellite phone was dead. All their electronic equipment was malfunctioning. Jerome wrote that they decided to hike out at first light, carrying Oliver if necessary. That was his second to last entry, written at dusk. I've read it 100 times. He described seeing figures on the ice, moving in the distance. Tall figures that walked wrong, with a gait that was too smooth, too fluid. They were coming from the direction of the pit, heading toward the camp. The final entry was written in the middle of the night. One sentence in capital letters, pressed so hard into the paper that it tore through in places. IT was never dead, it was waiting. The search and rescue team found their camp abandoned. Tents were shredded from the inside. Equipment was scattered across the ice, destroyed. They found Oliver's body in the pit, frozen solid, positioned in a way that the lead investigator refused to describe in the official report. I've seen the photos. He was posed like the thing they'd found, arms and legs at impossible angles, spine curved backward. His mouth was open wide, wider than should be possible, filled with ice. They never found Jerome or Rebecca, but 2 months after the search was called off, a fisherman on the other side of Lake Baikal reported seeing someone standing on the ice at dawn. A woman, he said, just standing there motionless as the sun rose. He called out to her, asked if she needed help. She turned to look at him, and said that's when he realized something was wrong with her proportions. Her arms were too long. Her head was the wrong shape. When she started walking toward him, he ran. He described her movement as sliding, like she was being pulled across the ice rather than walking. I think about that fisherman's story every day. I think about my uncle's journal, about what they found in that pit. The government sealed the area, said it was a geological hazard, but I know the real reason. They're afraid of what else might be thawing out there. Climate change is melting the Siberian permafrost at an accelerating rate, exposing layers of ice that have been frozen for tens of thousands of years. And if Jerome found something that was waiting all that time, something that woke up when the ice melted, what else is down there? I've spent years researching historical records from the region. Turns out there are stories, dozens of them, spanning centuries. Tales of things that emerge from melting ice, things that take people, things that wear human shapes but move wrong. The local indigenous peoples have legends about beings that sleep in the frozen earth, waiting for the thaw. Every culture around Lake Baikal has some version of the same warning. Some ice should never melt. Last week, I got a message from an unknown number. No text, just a video file. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. It was footage from a security camera at some kind of research station, timestamped 3 days ago. The image was grainy, black and white, showing a person approaching the camera through the snow. They walk right up to the lens, face filling the frame. It was Rebecca. I recognized her immediately, even after all these years. But her eyes were wrong, empty, and her mouth moved like she was speaking, but no sound came through. She just mouthed the same phrase over and over before walking away into the dark. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could read her lips. 2 words, repeated endlessly. Come back. I've changed my phone number since then, moved twice. But yesterday, I found ice crystals forming on my bedroom window. It's June, and I live in Arizona. The temperature outside is 90 degrees. The ice formed in a pattern, spreading across the glass in branching lines that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. And in the center, where the ice was thickest, I could have sworn I saw a handprint. Too large, too many fingers. When I touched the window, the glass was so cold it burned my skin. Something followed them back from that pit. Something that knows I'm Jerome's niece, and I think it's been looking for me. There's a Soviet-era research facility in the Taimyr Peninsula that officially doesn't exist. I know because I worked there for 18 months, and I signed documents promising I'd never speak about what we did. But what happened to my team supersedes any security clearance. My name is Jackson, and this is why 12 people vanished from a facility the Russian government claims was never operational. Someone needs to know what's out there, even if telling this story ruins my life. I was recruited in 2008, fresh out of my doctorate in atmospheric physics. The job posting was vague, just requirements for cold weather research experience and the willingness to work in isolated conditions. The pay was extraordinary. The interview consisted of technical questions and a psychological evaluation that lasted 4 hours. A week later, I was on a military transport plane heading into the Arctic Circle. No idea where I was actually going. The facility was built into a hillside, half buried in permafrost, about 200 kilometers from the nearest settlement. From above, it looked like nothing, just snow-covered bunkers and a few antenna arrays. But underground it was massive. 3 levels of laboratories, dormitories, storage, all connected by tunnels bored through the frozen rock. There were 28 of us total, scientists and support staff, living in complete isolation for 6-month rotations. Our mission was officially atmospheric monitoring, but what we were really doing was listening. The Cold War might have ended, but Russia still maintained listening posts throughout Siberia, remnants of a time when they expected American bombers to come screaming over the pole. Our facility was one of the last still operational, though by 2008, we weren't listening for aircraft. We were monitoring something else, something the project director, a stern woman named Dr. Volkov, called atmospheric anomalies. Strange signals detected in the ELF range, extremely low frequency, below the threshold of human hearing. They appeared randomly, with no discernible pattern, originating from somewhere in the surrounding wilderness. The signals had been detected for decades, but it wasn't until the 2000s that computing power advanced enough to analyze them properly. When they ran the signals through audio processing software and sped them up, they found something disturbing. The anomalies weren't random noise. They had structure, patterns. Dr. Volkov played us the processed audio during our orientation briefing. It sounded like breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing, impossibly slow. One breath cycle every several minutes. And occasionally, between the breaths, there were other sounds. Sounds that almost resembled words. Our job was to locate the source. We had sensor arrays distributed across a 500-kilometer radius, triangulating the signals every time they appeared. For the first 14 months, it was routine. Boring even. We detect a signal, input the data, run calculations, update our maps. The source seemed to move, shifting position across the tundra with no apparent logic. Sometimes it was 40 kilometers away. Sometimes it was 300. It never came closer than 30 kilometers to our facility. Then everything changed in December 2009. We detected a signal so strong it overloaded our equipment. The source was less than 2 kilometers away, practically on top of us. Dr. Volkov immediately ordered a surface investigation. A team of 6, myself included, suited up and went out into the winter darkness. The temperature was minus 52, cold enough that metal became brittle and exposed skin froze solid in seconds. We had 2 hours of light from our helmet lamps and strict orders to return before our battery packs ran down. We found the source at a site about 1.8 kilometers northeast of the facility. There was nothing there, just snow and rock. But our equipment was going crazy, detecting massive ELF emissions coming from directly beneath our feet. We set up ground-penetrating radar and found a void, a large empty space about 30 meters down in the permafrost. Natural cave systems were rare in this region, and this one had characteristics that didn't make sense. The walls were too smooth, the dimensions too precise. Dr. Volkov authorized drilling. It took 3 days to bore down to the void. When we finally broke through, the smell that came up to the drill hole made everyone within 10 meters violently sick. It was biological, organic decay, but wrong somehow. Too old, too concentrated. We lowered camera down. What we saw doesn't make sense even now. The void was enormous, easily 40 meters across, and the walls were covered in something that looked like fossilized tissue. Not rock, tissue, like the inside of some massive organism, frozen and preserved. And at the center of that space was a structure. I don't know how else to describe it. It was geometric, made of material we couldn't identify, covered in markings that might have been writing. The camera only functioned for about 90 seconds before something in that void fried its electronics. But in those 90 seconds, we all saw the structure pulse. Once, a ripple of movement that traveled across its surface, accompanied by a sound so low our ears couldn't process it, but we felt it in our bones. Dr. Volkov sealed the drill hole immediately. She called for an emergency consultation with Moscow, used a satellite phone I didn't know we had. I was standing outside her office when I heard her side of the conversation. She was arguing with someone, her voice escalating, and I heard her say something I'll never forget. "It's not a structure. It's a component. We drilled into something that's still alive." The breathing sound stopped after that. Our sensors went quiet for the first time in 40 years. We should have been relieved. Instead, the silence felt worse, like something had noticed us. The facility's atmosphere changed. People became paranoid, jumpy. Small things started going wrong. Equipment malfunctioning, lights flickering, temperature fluctuations in the tunnels. And then team members started reporting dreams. The same dream, all of us. We were standing in that void beneath the ice, surrounded by darkness, and something was breathing very close to us. We couldn't see it, but we could feel its presence, enormous and ancient and aware. In the dream, it would ask us a question, not in words. The question would simply appear in our minds, like someone had placed it there. "Do you want to understand?" And we'd wake up with our hearts pounding, covered in cold sweat, unable to remember if we'd answered. Lily was the first to disappear. She was a seismologist, young, brilliant, always laughing. She went to bed normally. Her roommate saw her at lights out. By morning, her bed was empty. We searched every centimeter of the facility. She was just gone. No tracks in the snow outside. No disturbance. Nothing. 3 days later, Andrew vanished. Then Patricia. Then others. One every few days, plucked from the facility with no trace, no explanation. Dr. Volkov tried to organize an evacuation, but when we went to the surface, we found the antenna arrays destroyed. Someone had methodically torn them apart, ripped the wiring out, smashed the transmitters. Our communications equipment in the facility was similarly sabotaged. We were cut off, and the next supply flight wasn't scheduled for 6 weeks. We were trapped there with something that was taking us one by one. I started noticing the survivors were the ones who remembered answering no in the dream. The ones who vanished were the ones who either couldn't remember answering or who'd said yes. I mentioned this to Dr. Volkov, and she went very pale. She said the question wasn't about understanding. It was permission. The entity below us was asking permission to show us something, and everyone who agreed was being taken to see it. By the time the rescue team arrived, responding to our missed check-ins, there were only 4 of us left. Me, Dr. Volkov, and 2 technicians. The others were gone, vanished from a sealed underground facility with no exits except the ones we'd been guarding. The investigation found nothing. No evidence of violence, no signs of how they'd left. The official report called it a mass psychotic episode, said we'd killed our colleagues and hidden the bodies. But I know what happened. They went down to that thing beneath the ice. They accepted its offer to understand, and it showed them something. What? I don't know. I never will, because I was too afraid to say yes. I wake up every night wondering if I made the right choice. The dream still comes. That question still echoes in my mind. Do you want to understand? The facility was permanently closed and buried under controlled avalanche. All records were sealed. The government denies any of us were ever there. The last month, I received a package at my home in California. No return address. Inside was a photograph, taken recently based on the metadata, showing the Taimyr hillside where the facility used to be. The snow had melted in a large circle, exposing the bunker entrance. And standing in front of that entrance, barely visible in the image, were 12 figures. They were too far away to identify, but I counted them. Exactly 12. The same number of team members who vanished. I'm writing this because I think it's spreading. The breathing sounds have been detected again, this time at 3 other locations across the Arctic. Russia, Canada, Alaska, wherever the permafrost is melting. These voids are being exposed. These things, whatever they are, have been sleeping in the frozen earth for thousands of years, and now they're waking up. They're asking their question to anyone who gets close enough to hear it. If you're reading this, If you're planning any kind of expedition to the Arctic or Siberia, please listen to me. If you start hearing things in the ice, if you have dreams about darkness and breathing, if something asks you a question, say no. Don't try to understand. Some knowledge isn't meant for us. Some things should stay frozen and forgotten, because the ones who said yes, they understood, and understanding changed them into something that could stand in the Arctic winter without cold weather gear, something that doesn't need food or sleep, something that waits in the snow for the next person curious enough to drill down and ask questions. They're still there at those sites, standing guard over what's below, and they're not human anymore. I still have the dream. That question still comes, but lately it's changed. Now there's a second voice in the darkness, multiple voices, speaking in unison, and they're not asking anymore. They're telling me, you will understand. I've started hearing breathing sounds in my house at night. Low, rhythmic, patient. I don't think saying no was enough. I think just knowing about it, just being close to it, marked me somehow. If I disappear, if you hear about a missing person case in California with no explanation, you'll know what happened. I answered the question, or the question stopped waiting for an answer.